Hello, Hen.
Hi, Kaz.
Now you're seated in front of the camera. Now I can start with the controversial questions.
Absolutely.
What's your bank PIN card number? Just to start there. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. I know this is the start of a series, so I couldn't give you a lot of info of what's going to happen next. But I promise I'll be kind, and I promise you can be honest about me. But not stuff that they should not know.
Right.
Okay. So if anyone asks, I was utterly professional as a student.
As long as you don't ask me about American politics.
Not again. I've learned that lesson. What we are going to start with, though, is a round of IMDb roulette. So for clarity, you have no idea what I'm going to ask next. I am bargaining on the fact that you probably don't know any of these answers because I tried to shape them like that. So good luck to mostly you. The rest will be fine. Question number one, to kick us off. What on IMDb, what is your very first directing credit?
I have no idea.
It comes in later than it should. As ons twee eers getroud is in 1984.
That was my very first television production, but not theatre.
Yes.
Yeah, that was the first single drama I did on television for SABC.
Okay, so that
days.
tracks.
Yeah.
The next one I asked you before and you didn't know, so I don't know if you studied it up yet, but which character did Al Debo play in Dot en Key?
Oh. Al Debo was a comedian on stage. He was also a singer and an actor. He was of the old school. Yeah. He couldn't rehearse. He could just improvise. In Dot en Key, he played a client of Narina Ferreira, who played Dot, and she had an agency, an escort agency, not in that sense. The clients were all on her books, and she would then set them up for dates. And then opposite from her was the detective agency run by Patrick Maynard, and the secretary was Marion Holm. And he was one of the clients on her books, and Siegfried Maynard was the janitor of the building. He spoke Dutch, and that was his part. But he refused to rehearse. He couldn't, because he couldn't remember anything.
So you gave
him only
just
improvise.
What, you gave him the overall idea of the scene, and
you could tell him anything you want. He would still do his own thing, because that's the way they worked in those days. They didn't get scripts on set. All those movies, black and white movies he made with Frederik Burgers in the 40s and the early 50s in South Africa. They would arrive on set and their script would be one paper, and that would be the entire movie. One piece of paper, and the whole story would be on there, and they would be told to improvise a scene.
You mentioned Frederik Burger, if I remember correctly. I saw him in Pizza Tante.
Yeah.
In a dress.
That's it.
He looks a lot like Willie Esterhuizen.
Ah.
Don't tell Willie I said that.
Yeah, that was the Afrikaans version of Charlie's Aunt.
Yeah.
Yes.
I played in the stage version.
Yes.
As a student.
Yeah.
Question number 3. By the way, that was an excellent answer. Well done. Question number 3. Who were the cast of Die Houtbord?
Die Houtbord was Trudy Taljaard. Most of them are dead.
That's true.
Mees Eksteen, deceased. Oom Siegfried Maynard, he was the lead, deceased. He turned 80 that year. We especially did it for his 80th birthday.
Wow.
He could choose his own play that I would then do with him on location.
I didn't know that.
Trudy Taljaard, Mees Eksteen, Nico Liebenberg, Annette Engelbrecht, Nikki Rebello, Soulette Minnaar, and Al Debo, who played
who improvised a role.
Yes, Siegfried Maynard arrived on set. He saw Al Debo was cast, and he said, "What's he doing here?" And I said, "I cast him." He said, "I'm not playing with opposite him. He's a clown." He's a clown. He doesn't want to rehearse. Siegfried Maynard was very meticulous. Yeah. Everything had to be just right. He was very prepared. He was a highly professional actor. Everything had to be set out. He would take that cup on that line. He would put it down on that word. He would turn his head in that direction on that section of the dialogue. Whereas Al Debo was all over the place.
But Siegfried Maynard came from the Hanekoms, didn't he?
Ja,
As a
even
young
before
actor,
that. Even
yeah.
before that. Ja, he toured with the Hanekom geselskap, Hendrik and Matilda Hanekom.
And that's a lot of discipline.
Yes. And he acted till, well, die Houtpoort. He won his first Arties Award for Best Actor. And yeah, he was staunch. One of the greats of South Africa. He opened the State Theatre in Pretoria. He was the very first actor to set foot on the opening night when the State Theatre opened in 1981.
I'm assuming that's on the opera stage.
That was in the big theatre,
Yeah.
not the opera stage. Yeah.
Wow. I must tell you, I did my research thoroughly, and you've got more cast members here than I could find. So well done. Russian IMDb Roulette is going great so far. Not for me. You've got one acting credit on IMDb for which film?
Ampi?
Well done. Yes,
Yeah.
Ampi.
Ampi.
Exactly. Last question, but arguably the most important. If you get this one wrong, I do think the audience is going to think very negatively of you. Who is your favorite actor to play Nadia's boyfriend on Sevenlaan?
Who is my favorite actor?
Yeah. There was an actor who played her boyfriend.
Kaz.
Well, yeah, sure. Yeah, that'll
McLaren.
work.
Yeah,
Yeah, that'll
he
work.
played it. Yeah.
Let's say that. Yeah.
Most of his scenes were shot in an alley for some other reason.
Where
I
he
can remember
belonged,
that. Yeah.
if you ask me.
Alley Cat.
I must tell you, that was probably one of the most successful IMDb roulettes we've had to date, so well done. Now we move on to something a little less serious, which is your career.
Oh my Lord.
And I say that with acknowledgement that since I've known you, you have an astonishing career that we can track through, but I've never summed you up or had a conversation with you where I felt that you were bogged down by your career, had any regrets, or found that this was work. Whenever I spoke to you about this industry, it was as if you understood the privilege you were in. Do you feel like that?
Yes, it was. I decided what I wanted to do in life when I was 8 years old. That is when it came to me.
I have that as my, by the way, as my first question, because you started directing when you were 8
Yeah.
with the neighborhood kids in the
That's
orchard.
Right. Yeah,
The interview I found was a Kuyavel orchard.
that's correct.
What is a Kuyavel in English?
An,
Is it a guava?
guava.
I thought
Guava
so.
orchard,
But guava
yeah.
orchard didn't write properly, so I just said orchard. But then in the army also, interestingly, you started a performing group
That's right.
called the Bravox.
Bravox, yes. I was in Bravo Company, and we had to go to the border, which was not fun in those days.
I've
it was
heard.
quite strenuous. And having arrived on the border, the first year of my training was done in South Africa, of course, and at Oudtshoorn, Potchefstroom, and Jan Kempdorp. And then we had to go to the border. Okay, so we went there, arrived, and I gave it one look, and I decided I'm not going to have myself killed at this stage of my life. And what am I going to do? So I spoke to some of the guys that became my friends, and they all came from Bellville, Tygerberg, that area in Cape Town. And I discovered that they were all musicians. And I said, okay, let's get all your instruments up here. I'll organize it. We'll get all the instruments up here. And I contacted the SABC in Sea Point in Cape Town, where I had already done, at that stage in my life, a couple of radio plays. And there was a thing on SABC in those days called Next Stop McCoefley. And I got all those old scripts. They were sketches. And I directed some of the army guys, and some of the other oaks played in the band and sang and blah, blah, blah. We put this whole thing together. We were Bravo Company, which was B Company. So it was, in those days, the Performing Arts Councils were PACOFs, PACT, NAPAC, that kind of word attached to it. So I said, okay, let's call ourselves Bravox. Bravo for Bravo Company, and then the CS stands for Concert Society.
Wow,
Bravo
nice.
Concert Society. And we had a big Bedford, and we toured on the actual border from camp to camp to camp to camp. And we would park all the Bedfords of the company in a circle, switch on their lights, and we would perform in the circle.
That's insane.
And then we would move to the next camp. And that is what we did, yeah. And we became so good that they actually then decided to give us our own bus. And then we could tour down to the Republic of South Africa because we were way in Angola and in the north of...
Which is where the war was.
Yeah, and
That's
then we
incredible.
started touring and we became so good that the Alabama Studentengeselskap of Potchefstroom University, we toured with them and we were actually filled. We did the first half of the show and they did the second half.
And they were quite famed.
Yeah, they were
the
very
Alabama
famous
camp.
in those days.
Yeah.
Had a couple of hits on Springbok Radio.
To keep on with, because this is my trend here, is the way you found your way into the industry is the most unorthodox I've seen in a long time. Then after the army, you went to study.
Yeah.
And you studied law.
I must tell you, but when I was 8 years old, it was the height of apartheid, okay? And we had a maid, we called it a maid in those days, a colored lady who worked for us. She was 16.
Wow.
I was 8. We became inseparable. For some other reason, she clicked with me and she had the most influence in my life of anybody that I can think of.
That was Maria, right?
Yeah, Maria was her name. And she made me study all the fan magazines and the movie magazines that you could buy in the cafes those days. And then there was a bioscope in the middle of Bellville, and then in Bellville South, because it was apartheid, that is where all the colored people went. And the white people went to the pug house in town. And I would mow 3 lawns on a Saturday morning. My father would give me enough money to pay for my ticket and her ticket, and then enough cents for an ice cream each.
Nice.
And then we'd get together and compare notes of 2 different movies.
Wow.
And we took those movies, and during the week, we would take all the kids from the neighborhood into the guava orchard, which was huge. And then we would rehearse and bring those scenes, our special favorite scenes from our respective movies, to life.
That's
And I would direct it, and she would direct some people, and we didn't understand what the word directing meant. But that was actually what I was doing on a constant basis throughout my primary school days.
But
From the-
you've
from-
mentioned before that how pivotal Maria was to your career, basically. She created, in your words from previous interviews, who you are today.
My mind couldn't connect. I couldn't understand what apartheid was. So I just saw her as this incredible friend. My mother actually became jealous of our relationship, and she fired her after a couple of years. That was apartheid.
Just
eh?
out of the jealousy.
I could remember me standing in the lounge when she walked away from our house the very last day, and I cried like a baby, and I thought my life had come to an end. Because there was no ways that I could live without this woman. She was also very good. She had to leave school at the age of 15, and she was very good with maths, and I was terrible with maths. She used to help me with that, and she would make me write tests on the movies that we saw. We had to go to the movie houses, study the posters. I had to know the name of every actor, the lead actors, the supporting actors, and then I would write tests on that. And she had a rather thick stick, and for everything I got wrong, I got a hoe on my palm.
Wow.
And yeah, that is how my love of movies started.
To continue that, and you mentioned now you're terrible with maths, or you were at least terrible with maths. When you studied law at Stellenbosch, you didn't do you did a BCom degree.
Yes, my father said, you're not doing a BA degree.
Yeah, so
No
you
son of
were-
his does a BA degree, I must do a BCom degree, which was terrible. I had to take accounting and economics and business economics. And I mean, it was absolutely, I don't know how I absolutely do not know how I got through all of that.
And that was your trigger on stage to start crying.
Yeah.
Just thinking of economics. And what's weird to me is why I take you through this is at that time, while studying law, which was, in your own words, an incredibly difficult course with the economics and the accounting. On the side, you studied drama with Babs Laker at the ADK.
Yes, the Academy for Dramatic Arts.
Yeah.
And that was in my 3rd year. In my 3rd year, I decided there's no ways I'm going to go on and do another degree. But I had to. My parents just said, if we're going to pay for you, you've got to do LLB, which I did. I got my LLB, but in my last 3 years at varsity, I was there for 5 years. Okay, I saw the poster for something called the Academy of Dramatic Arts, and then I started with Babs Laker. She was the head. She was one of the biggest classical actresses on the South African stage. To see that woman act is astounding. She had a voice and a craft and a technique that superseded any female actress that I've ever encountered in South Africa in my lifetime. I had class with her on a Friday in Stellenbosch, and then during the week with Sandra Temming, who was also a lecturer at the Academy for Dramatic Arts at that time.
Sandra went on eventually to be the head of UCT drama.
That's not the head, but she lectured there.
Lectured there.
Yeah, she was a lecturer there. And then after LLB, I was admitted to the role of advocates of the Supreme Court of South Africa. And
if anyone needs help.
Funnily enough, I was at Packhoffs then as an actor, and
Yes.
all the actors in the company went on the day that I was admitted to the bar. They went with me, and in those days, women had to wear hats in court, and all the actresses went out to Fushini's and whatever in Bloemfontein, and they bought hats. And as the actors entered the court, everybody was talking. You know, actors, they never shut up.
Yeah.
So the judge was sitting there, and he said, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen at the back there, the divorce courts are just down the passage. It's court 6C. And I was admitted to the bar.
That's amazing. But your friends duly encouraging you.
Absolutely.
So throughout all of those adventures, and I want to recap, it's the Guava Orchard, the Army, LLB, Babs Laker, Sandra Temming. You managed to win while doing your law degree in the student best director and the student best playwright in 1977.
That's correct. Yeah.
How the hell did you get through your studies?
That is what the head of the law department wanted to know from me in my third year oral exam.
But that's quite impressive, because that's a workload.
Look,
and
at
a
that
half.
stage in my life, from my third year on, I knew there was no ways I was going to go into law. Not at all. I got both degrees. I got admitted to the bar, role of advocates, everything done. I had the pictures taken, framed them, put them up in my father's house, and said, now I'm going to do what I like. And that is, I'm going into acting and directing. And that is what I did at Stellenbosch in my third year, my fourth year, and my fifth year. It was hell keeping up, because law is, in comparison to drama, it's like comparing a grain of sugar to
A horse.
Yeah, it's completely, you can't compare the amount of work you have to get through in 5 years. Anyway, so in between I did all these plays. I didn't study drama formally at the department of the drama department. I was with Babs at the Academy for Dramatic Arts, and then I would be in plays at we did it at a theatre called the Oude Libertas Klein Theater. It was a national monument in Stellenbosch. It burned down a couple of years ago. Yeah, and that is where we used to do what we all belonged to a club called USAT. Now that stood for the University of Stellenbosch Amateur Dramatics, and that is where we did these plays. All the hostels would come together, and we would produce and direct. And I did my first directing there, and I wrote that play. It was called Move Over Darling. Wow. It was a sex comedy, and completely commercial. And later on in life,
do you still have a copy of Move Over Darling?
Later on in life, it was a one-act play. Later on in life, the Technikon Pretoria Drama Department asked me to do something with their third years. So I took this play and I rewrote it, and I translated it into Afrikaans, and I extended it into a three-act play. It was called In die Bol gepak.
That was 1988, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
I remember.
Yes.
And you won. I think you won a best play, student play,
Yeah, that was when we did Move Over Darling. I won the award. I shared it with Marlene van die Kerk, who went on to write Agat and Triumph. And of course, yeah.
Those small productions.
Yeah, those very small Afrikaans books.
In that time period,
Afrikaans literature.
1976, you did Lokval vir 'n Eensame Man with Marie van Heerden. Was that part of
I acted in
USAT?
that. No, that was separate. That Maria van Heerden was a well-known director at Stellenbosch in those days. Johan van Heerden was her son. Yeah, Lokval vir 'n Eensame Man with Elsabie Daniel playing my wife at that stage. And also it was the height of apartheid. We couldn't play for mixed audiences. So, but Maria got all the previews. We did about 2-3 previews, and she would get the entire Clutersville, where all the brown people lived in those days, to come and
Support you.
watch the previews. And it was so funny. I played this man that you, Lokval vir 'n Eensame Man. My wife was poisoning me in the play, and the audience knows it. I don't. So at one stage, they would comment from the audience. At one stage, she turned her back on me and she gave me a look, but I couldn't see her. I was sitting with my back to her, and then she would give this look, and then she had to do her exit. And from the audience came, "Yo, fucking bitch," things like that. They would absolutely go with the play. Or she would bring me food to eat, and they would shout at me, "Don't eat it! Don't eat it!"
Well, it sounds
Whatever
like a
you do.
children's theatre play.
Yeah, it was fantastic, brilliant.
But that counts as your first professional performance, isn't it?
I don't know. I don't know whether you could call it a student student still, you know.
Okay, still student
A
production.
lot of,
The reason I asked that is in this time period, and I'm unclear, the timeline there is unclear in research, is you did a lot of radio drama,
yeah.
and it was in this time period.
Yes, it was in that time period. I did a lot of radio theatre for Suzanne van Wyk. Now, I'm going back to the 70s now, hey. Suzanne van Wyk was a terror. She was a legend. I don't know how many Arties Awards she won. She was a brilliant, brilliant director. In those days, like today, you will know, if you go for a radio theatre to Auckland Park, you will get the script upon arrival kind of thing and record it immediately. Not in those days. You had 3 evenings of rehearsal, and on the 4th evening you would record the entire play of 3 hours long, because she did theatre plays, the classics, like Jean Anouilh or Arthur Miller, Adam Small. We would do all those plays. Wow. And on the 4th night, she would record it from A to Z, and nobody was allowed to fluff. You had to run between studios, because she used about 3 studios to get different ambience in the sound. Like if you were in bed, you had to lie in a bed in the studio, speaking like we did Death of a Salesman, Arthur Miller, and me and my brother, I played Happy, Johan van Jaarsveld played my brother, lying in 2 beds, doing our dialogue, rolling around so you could get the whole effect. Then run to the next studio. She doesn't stop, because my next scene, I'm in a flashback as the young Happy as a child. And I had to just transform on my way to the next studio. The music bridge would finish as I arrive at the microphone and carry on.
I'm jumping forward a little bit, because obviously, as we've explained or shown now, you've been doing a lot up until this point, and you barely finished studying. How did Packoffs come about? Because you started with Packoffs in 1980? 79?
1979.
Yeah.
Yes, I was still in my 20s and beautiful and young and handsome.
You look
for about
exactly the same.
For about 2 years, and after that it all collapsed. When I realized that I was a character actor and I was never going to be Brad Pitt. Never. And that is what I still tell students. You must look yourself in the mirror and say to yourself, are you seeing Brad Pitt there? If you don't, you must absolutely take it for granted that you are going to be playing character parts from now on, which are all the best parts, or the villains.
I play character parts for that reason still, till today.
Anyway,
you started
yeah.
with Poppy Nongena in 79.
Yes, that was my very first professional production, was the Swerfjare van Poppy Nongena, which is the very, very famous book by Elsa Joubert that Sandra Kotze, who was the artistic director of Packoffs, she was married to Kobus Rousseau, he was the head of Packoffs, she directed it. And again, it was still the height of apartheid. Now, all the characters in Poppy Nongena, they're black characters.
that's
There's
the
one white woman in it. Right, so we had to all play black characters. I had to play Poppy's husband, and then later on I play her activist son, or brother, sorry, brother. And we toured the Free State. You would start off each year at Packoffs with a tour of 6 weeks through the Free State to every little village and town in that, in the scorched earth, I would call it. And you can imagine in apartheid, I mean, here a play about Poppy Nongena. I don't know how many in the audience that you've read the book. It's one of the most famous books ever written in South Africa. It was a hit. It's been done how many times after that? But we were an all-white cast, and the audience, when you start singing Nkosi Sikelel' Afrika, which is part of the play, during a church service, the audience would start walking out. They would start stamping their feet. They would shout comments to you, la 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 la.
But this is what's absurd to me, because the Performing Arts Councils were obviously very funded by the National Party
Yes.
and the apartheid government at that time.
Absolutely.
And here you guys are using their money, doing ostensibly an anti-apartheid play,
Yes.
as white actors playing black characters and touring it. It is such an absurd kind of actually it's an activist move, isn't it?
Yes.
Did you guys know that you were doing this?
Yes, we knew. Kobus and Sandy, Sandra Kotze, they were very advanced in doing that. Elsa Joubert came for the opening. We did two Adams. No, we did one. I did Kana Ek Huis Toe van Adam Small. I did for radio. We did Die Christmas van Mac Jacobs, Adam Small. At Packoffs, also an entire it's supposed to be played by coloured actors.
All of
the
them.
entire play, white. We were all white. Adam Small was at the opening, special arrangement so that he could be there in the audience. The playwright.
Yeah, that was a law, right?
Law, absolutely. It was segregated, and the Bloemfontein Civic Theatre, nothing was open in those days. The Nico Milan Theatre in Cape Town, which now known as Artscape, was the first theatre to open to all races.
Between, this is again, it's research and everything isn't out there, but between 1980, 1981 and 1982, it is a flourish of plays that you were doing. And then what fascinates me the most is in the middle of that, it seems to me in 1981, start with Skool vir Hans Worse, which is your directorial debut.
Schule mit Clowns.
Yeah.
It was a German, written by Karl Wächter. It was a children's play, but it was a new Nazi play that I did. It was.
You dabbled in all kinds of fascism.
Barry Leroux, that was her first set she ever gave me, and it was all it was set. It was poles everywhere. All the actors were on poles the whole time, and it was a very advanced play for its time.
How the hell did you convince? Because this is what stands out for me. Taking into context all the stuff you've done from 8 years old through the army and everything, you were 3 years into Packoffs, and you convinced them to let you direct a play.
Actually 2 years.
2 years.
Yeah.
How the hell?
I haunted Kobus Rousseau. He was the head of drama, and as you know, Kobus Rousseau was the biggest actor at that stage in South Africa. He was the most well-known, classically trained. I mean, I saw Kobus Rousseau. That's the other thing, how I trained myself when I was at high school and a student at Stellenbosch. I used to attend every play that was done in and around Cape Town. I absolutely saw to it. I studied what was going on that stage. And that is where I saw Kobus Rousseau playing Molière's Tartuffe, Richard III, Shakespeare, He was the first Kana in Kana Ekoaistu. I saw Sandra Kotze in Chekhov, so Vanya, all those classics. And I was in standard 9, I don't know what they call it today, what grade 11, when they came to Belleville Civic Centre with Richard III. And I fell in love. I sat there as a boy in standard 9, saw my first Shakespeare, and I fell in love with Cobus Rousseau doing Richard III, the Hunchback. Okay? And in the foyer there was this huge picture of him as Richard III. But the classic look of Richard III, not a deconstructed version of the play. In those days there was nothing known as deconstruction of a classical piece of theatre. And as they did the curtain call, I slipped out, I stole this huge picture and ran home with it. Because we didn't, and it hangs in my lounge today. And when I arrived at Packoff's, and Cobus was the head of Packoff's, there was a party in my cottage one night, and Cobus, who didn't like parties, went into my bedroom and he sat there. He saw this picture and he said, called me in, he said, where do you, in those days it was like, yes, this is the boss, the big boss, you weet, it's like Cobus, that is how you spoke to him, you never said hey or say. It's like me saying to you, Kaz, do you mind, Kaz, if I take, Kaz, will you please pick up, do you mind that? That's the way you respected these senior actors. And he said, yo, Bogger, where did you get that picture? You do know there's no negative available. It was stolen in the Belleville Civic Centre on the one night, and it was you there's the negative of that picture doesn't exist.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
You have the only copy of that.
And that is how I taught myself. I read a lot after meeting Sandra Temming. I absolutely read, and that is how I actually never had a formal drama training at a department, but through all of this that I'm telling you is how I trained myself. Yeah. So by the time I got to Packoff's, and I was there for about 2 years, when the head of the drama department, Ben de Koker, Professor Ben de Koker at that stage, Nico Lewis was also there, but he was still a junior lecturer. He came to me and said, look, Henry, you have all this knowledge. Why don't we package that into an honours degree for you? And I said, but I don't have a BA drama. He said, no, you've got a BCom LLB, you've got 2 degrees, plus we'll take all your practical work at Packoff's. You just have to do 2 practical exams. You don't have to attend any classes, but you must hand in every 14 days cover a new playwright's work. 2 of his plays every 2 weeks, and they went through the entire genre, and you had to write these journals on it, which I would do after 11 o'clock at night, every day of my life, after coming off, finishing a play at the Civic, going back to the cottage, and then you would sit down, and I managed to do that within a year, and I got my honours degree.
In drama.
That they gave me, yeah.
I didn't know that, and I was already amazed about the amount of work, because in this time period, you're also directing a musical. You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown, while acting in that musical as well. You're acting and directing constantly in various plays. Your career seems to me to be highlighted by these spurts of working yourself to death.
Yes, look, as I said, we did 3 productions at the same time. You would be acting on stage in the evening, and in the morning I would be directing a play, and in the afternoon I would be rehearsing to act in the forthcoming production. That is how we worked.
At dawn you'd be writing your journals.
And then go home at 11 at night and then work on the honours degree.
I need to...
But we loved it.
For time's sake, I need to jump a little bit forward, because like I said and promised, we need to keep in mind, this is still the beginning of your career, right?
Yeah.
Just for context.
Yeah.
We jump to 1991, when Mr. Franz Marx contacted you to join Igoli?
Yes, at the SABC, I was.
Oh,
How I
you
got
first,
to the SABC.
before, yeah, you had SABC, you
When I
had
left,
Belade for
left
Enkele.
Pacos, I lectured at the Pretoria Technikon, the drama department, for a year. And then I decided, no, I want to go back to the profession. So I did an audition for Marius Weyers at PACT. He was the head of PACT for about a year. And he said to me, no, you don't have to audition, go back, you're definitely part of the company. And at the same time, I was going overseas with a Piers Nicholson Prize that I had just won in Bloemfontein for the biggest contribution to theatre in the Free State. That was 5,000 Rand in those days, and I could go overseas for 6 weeks and came back with change. I attended theatre all over London, was there for 3 weeks, and in Amsterdam, and in Paris, and in Edinburgh. Then on my way to the airport to go overseas, I went on at the SABC because Leon van Heerop and I was in a radio play at that time as well, at the Auckland Park SABC, and he told me there's a vacancy in the drama department, TV1 drama department, for a director. Why don't you apply? And I said, they'll never take me, I'm from the theatre. And on my way to the airport, I thought, well, let me take my resume and take some photographs, dumped it with the head of the drama department, and he interviewed me, and he said, just hold on, and he walked out, and he came back and he said, we want you. But Verna Vels, Lieve Hexie, she was his head. And she's in London at the moment. She has to appoint you. And I said, well, I'm going to London. In those days, there was no cell phones. He said, okay, I'll contact her. There'll be a letter for you at South Africa House on Trafalgar Square. You must collect that letter, then you'll know where she is, and then she can interview you in London. And she actually appointed me in that position of a permanent director at the drama department of TV1. And I walked in there, and the very next thing is Leon van Heerop had just written Belade vir 'n Enkeling. And I then decided this is what I want to do. I want to do this series. And I did 2 series, Belade 1 and Belade 2. They are both on YouTube. Annelien Kriel, who was in Belade 1, she was Miss World in 1974. She acted in the first series. Belade vir 'n Enkeling was amazing to shoot. We shot all over South Africa. And it
Well, you had
was
stars
28
like
one-hour episodes.
You created stars there like Selma, like Gavin van der Berg, Shireen Swart, Karen Retief.
Yeah.
I want to put it, because
Although-
it feels like I'm jumping half your career by going to Igoli. But I want to put into context that from you finishing your studies to here, shooting Belade vir 'n Enkeling on the verge of starting at Igoli, is only 10 years. Consider
Really?
that. It's only 10 years of your career that we've spoken about now.
I
so
should have
far.
been dead by then, yeah.
I mean,
I've outlived,
things I've seen you do.
outlived my time, as you can see.
as I would never say that.
I'm now sitting in the departure lounge at the airport.
Before you depart, starting Igoli after Belade, doing a television series, right?
Yeah.
You're starting on Igoli, which is a daily soap. It's
Yeah.
completely different kettle of fish.
Totally.
Brand new thing to do. Frans
Totally
Marx, visionary, starting that. What was it like starting a show like that?
Okay, at the SABC, I started with multicam, Totten Key, and I also did single dramas at the SABC, a lot of them. And Frans obviously saw it, because in those days you had 3 channels. SABC 1, 2 and 3. All the Afrikaans stuff was on SABC 1. Frans saw my work, I saw his work, everybody saw each other's work, because there was no Kyknet, there was nothing else. He was going to start Igoli on Mnet, who had just started up. And you had to subscribe to Mnet, but there was from 6 o'clock in the afternoon till 8 o'clock, there was a slot called Open Time, where everybody could watch Mnet. That is the way they try to get subscribers. Okay, so Igoli started as the very first soap in South Africa. There was nothing else. Nobody knew how to do a soap. Nobody knew how to do multicam for a soap, canning an episode a day in those days, where you had an episode between 14 and 22 scenes a day that you have to put in the can, starting at 7:30 with rehearsals and wrapping at 7:30. So 12-hour days. Klaar, einde van storie. France went all over the world to... he went to France, he went to Rio, which is a place where soap is extremely popular. They do 3-4 soaps on one lot. He went to America. The French can't fathom out how to do a soap. They can't work that fast. You know, the French, they shoot about 3 scenes, then they sit and have lunch for 3 hours under the trees, and then they set up a shot through you have 3 leaves in the foreground and the actor out of focus in the background. You can't work like that on a soap, okay? Yeah, it was a learning school and learning curve for all of us. There was a director, I was still finishing off Ballade 2 in post-production at the SABC, because that was a time when there was this big shift in South Africa. 94 was happening, and this is about 92, and everybody was leaving the SABC. The SABC was folding. All that expertise, everything just went out of the SABC, and I was still working for them full time because I had to finish the post-production, and France phoned me and said, can you come to Igoli, blah, blah, blah. So there was a director there at the time. He called me in, he put up his episodes, he said, look at this. And I watched it, and I thought, okay, what's now? He said, is this the way to shoot an episode? Is this the way to tell my stories? La, 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 la. And I said, and he started absolutely shitting on me. And I said, Frans, I didn't shoot this. He said, but that's why I'm appointing you. You see these moving things on this, they called actors. There's no acting. They are open, there are tracking shots here that lasts forever and nothing's happening. He's never on the face of an actor. Nobody, the story is not being told. And he went off on me. And that is how our relationship started building. And I would say, well, don't shout at me like that. He said, you don't shout at me. Don't you dare talk to me like that. I'm your boss. You do what I say. And I said, okay, Frans, la, 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 la. And that is... And you know, I figured out, okay, there's something called, like, you have to work out do your camera scripting. That is what I mean, I knew nothing when I started with Ballade vir 'n Enkeling. I walked in there raw. There was no training in those days. The drama departments only did theatre. You only trained in theatre. But anyway, I suddenly realized, okay, I can visualize. That's the main thing. Coming from the theatre, but not only coming from the theatre, I knew how to work with actors. I knew nothing about a camera, nothing about sound, nothing, but I could visualize and I could edit in my head. When I read a scene, I would see the edit points already. Upon the first read through of a scene, I would know where the cuts would come, how I would like it cut, and visualizing my scenes. Obviously, on the day you would change things and blah, 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 but you have to do your homework. So working on a camera script would take me hours at home to work out every single shot in every one of those 22 scenes per day. And I was on twice a week. Every shot, every edit point would be in my script, every note to the lighting department where I think they would be caught, because you can only block, because you know, if you shoot soap, as you know, you don't shoot it like single cam, you shoot the entire scene at once. Yeah. So my whole aim was, after I've said cut, you could take that scene and you could give it to the editor and he could top and tail it.
Yeah.
You wouldn't go and sit there with, yeah.
For the record though, what you just explained here, you had to invent yourself, because this was the start of that genre in South Africa.
Yes.
Nobody taught this to you.
Nobody taught that to me. No.
During this time, you still directed theatre
Yes.
while working on Igoli, while working these hours, while doing the scripting.
Yeah.
You had, I mean, I'm not. We don't have the time to go through the plays, but what is important to me in that time period is obviously the start of things like Ka and Ka, those festivals, and Igoli and television shows created these new stars like Die Soen with Brumilda van Rensburg and Steve Hofmeyer. These are new television stars that drew people into theatre that might previously not have been drawn into theatre. Was that the feeling?
Absolutely. Look, Igoli, I mean, they did road shows in those days. If those actors went on a road show, the M1 and the N1 would be closed off if they were at a mall. The amount of cars, they had to be flown in by helicopter in those days. So they couldn't move anywhere. They couldn't go out. They couldn't, they were absolutely, they were in people's houses every day of the week. And the same with Sevenelon. When I went to Sevenelon, the same effect. The first 15 years of Sevenelon in its golden era. After that, it went,
it dipped slightly.
It dips. After 7 years, the soap dips. I was there for 23 years on Sevenelon. I directed. It ended with about 5,500 episodes, of which I directed most of them. I used to direct twice a week or 3 times a week through 23 years.
That is the next point I want to jump to while you're on Sevenelon, because you were part of the crew that started Igoli. In 2000, you were part of the group that started Sevenelon.
Yeah.
That must have been a much easier start, or were there things that you wanted to do differently with Sevenelon that were happening at Igoli, for instance?
Well, obviously you grew in your experience, and so you applied all of that. The more work you do, the more constant work you do, then you're there every day doing that. But every script, every scene, especially on a soap, where you're on sets that the audience sees every day, they see the same characters, you have to be extremely creative to keep the viability and the life source of creativity flowing from the actors and also the cameramen. Excite them through the way you script so that they have challenges. You can't just keep them in one bloody position and tick-tock, tick-tock, tick-tock the whole time. Some directors work like that. They do. They chase them in on a wide shot and then tick-tock, 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 tick-tock next. And you know, by that time, I mean, the crew is sleeping behind, I mean, the mic, the boom starts dropping into shot, not the complicated work.
Yeah.
You challenge a cameraman, and that's the main thing in directing for the theatre and for television, is as a director, you may never ever walk onto that set thinking that you are the king. Pin. You must know your work. You must have done your homework exceptionally well. And then don't demand the respect of a crew. You, little director, and you, Mr. Senior Director, every day of your life, you must earn the respect of your crew.
And at this point, I want to ask, I've said it before in a previous episode, you introduced me to Mr. Andre Huguenet. One of
I'm not that old.
Not that we didn't shake hands. But since then, I've collected everything I can get my hands on about
Andre
him.
Huguenet.
And one of them is this book that I inherited from Louis van Niekerk. And everyone who joins us for the Footlights Project, I asked them to sign this book. Would you mind signing this one for me?
Yes, of course. It would be an honor.
There you go.
Yeah, if it wasn't for these people like Andre Huguenet, Vienna Nudea, Anna Neethling-Pool, all those people, there wouldn't be an industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is another topic we can speak hours about. I mean,
for our next season.
Yeah.
And thank you so much. Thank you for signing the book, but mostly, like we've said, you've got an extensive career stretching and still running today. I mean, last year you adjudicated the Fiestas as well. Your input is constant. But I think from my side, my generation, and I'm sure from their generation, there is not a job in this industry that is not here because of you and people like you. the work you did from Packoff's time, the work you did at SABC, the work you did the beginning of Mnet, Igoli, Siemendlon, everything we have today has a tinge of that, has experiences from that permeates. And I don't say this lightly when I say that without you as a pillar in this industry, it would have collapsed long ago.
No, I don't think so.
It is the absolute truth. But thank you for sharing that with us. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. And thank you for taking time to speak to children who are only as old as it took you to create an industry.
The one thing, my very last word will be, it never depends on one person, never ever. But one must never forget, this industry will not carry you. You must carry the industry.
Thank you. Now we get to the question section. I warn you, they're smart, but it's hidden.
Hello, sir. My name is Blue. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you.
Nice name for a poster.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. Earlier, you mentioned a more meticulous acting approach. And in the same breath, you mentioned a more free approach to acting. As your experience as a director, what type of actors do you generally prefer to work with?
Both is acceptable. As a director, you can never, ever tell an actor you must work like this or work like that. An actor must discover his own work process, but there has to be a process, and that is done at home, not on the set. There's no time for a director to teach people how to act on a set. That makes it very ruthless. You have far more freedom in theatre where you have more time to work with an actor. Now in theatre, which is the actor's medium, I prefer an actor that does his homework, makes choices at home, and then presents it in the rehearsal room, and then work on alternatives to play the part. Don't walk into the rehearsal room every day and give the same performance and just get notes. No. You must experiment with, you must take risks and be dangerous. So you must feel free to make the rehearsal room your tennis court. The tennis court is set by the director. That is his vision of the play or the episode in a soap or the feature film that he's making. He must give you the tennis court. And within that, I prefer the actor to be the free approach. Rigid approach applies more to soap in a way, but not all that much, because you work against time. You have no time on a soap if you have to do 14 scenes a day. So you don't have that much time on a soap to develop as an actor. You need the theatre to develop where your free approach is acceptable and is the way to go. I don't know whether I'm answering your question.
You totally have, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Hello, sir. My name is Ivan Dippenaar. I was just wondering, what would your advice be to students like us when we get our first opportunity to be on our first ever set as an actor? For that first day, what would your advice be?
Your first day. Don't turn up.
That should start with a bang.
Let them go with choice number 2. Well, the old cliche is be on time. Now, what does be on time means? Half an hour before your makeup call. Be there. Don't let them look for you, because things run amok on set and things go wrong and people start running behind time. You've got to be there. When they call your name, you've got to be there. Now, the preparation is important. The director is working against time. The crew is looking at you and wondering why you were cast, because you're supposed to do your job. Don't fluff, know your lines, and get through the scene. Now, that is the basics. I can go into a lecture about how you learn lines, Learning lines is not picking up a script and learning it like a parrot. You've got to really dissect that script and do a script analysis on that script. What is the object of the scene? Where am I going to in the scene? Where do I, with all due respect, climax in the scene? I don't climax here, I've got to build there, I've got to dip there, I've got to this, that. You can work out your whole journey over 3-4 nights. And through that process, I'm just being very brief in this now, you will learn your lines along the road, alongside as you go along. But coming on set, there's a fellow actor which is going to throw you completely. And you're going to get one rehearsal if you're lucky. Am I right?
Absolutely right.
In single cam, because everybody's working against time. You're going to get one rehearsal in a soap. There they work against time as well. Then you have 2 takes and everything is in the can. No delays. So preparation is number 1. You've got to arrive with an opening night performance on a film set. You must act at the drop of a hat. You haven't got the privilege of theatre where you have 3 to 4 to 5 weeks of rehearsal. You don't have that. So your preparation is going to be right up there. That is why I believe that I believe as a director, but that's me, that as a director, you must come from the theatre, where you work with the actor. You know how to work with actors. Going back to the theatre, in your profession, doing film, television, you must always try to go back to the theatre every now and then, at least once a year, if possible, to keep that fitness. The demands that theatre, the demands of theatre is extremely high. The standard is extremely high. But preparation, and that does not only mean you must know your lines, you must have a character going, everything must be there, so that the director can now take you further. If you don't give me a basis that I can work on, where do I start? Where do I start with you? And that is why you're here for 3 years.
Hello Henry, ek's Corine Marie van Hoogdalem. It's nice to be speaking to you. My question is, there's obviously a lot of goals that you have reached in your career up until now, but what is a goal that you have not yet reached that you still really want to reach?
I would love to do anything again. I mean, I love the theatre, I love film. I would like to direct a film, a movie, a feature film. I wouldn't like to do another soap in my life again. It's too, I mean, I don't have that energy anymore. You really have to, your energy level has got to be right up there. Red Bull, here we come. So yes, there's a lot of theatre I still want to do, plays that I know, that I've read, that I've seen. I mean, all the times that I traveled Europe, doing theatre studies in Europe all the time, in England and France, and of course the feature film. The books I've read, the stuff that I really want to see on the big screen, in the movie, yeah? It never ends. If you ask an actor, what would you like to do next? He says, my next part, you know? And you carry on with that. An actor never dies. You can grow to 110, you can still remember lines, you can still act. A director's life is even longer. He can sit in a chair and direct, in a wheelchair with false arms, a false leg, you know, that kind of thing. Never stops.
That's a great answer. I think the 2 tattoos we've collected so far is be there and I hope I don't come back.
Hi sir, my name is Jenna. So you spoke about how you were on the border and you performed during the height of apartheid. So generally you performed in front of many a crowd and many different people. What is one thing as a director that you learned from those different audiences that you take with you, and sort of the impact that the diversity in the audiences that you've performed for, how that influences your directing, if at all?
If you direct, depends what medium you're working in. If you work in the theatre, the number one person you must respect is the playwright. don't just go onto a director's trip. When I started off in the profession, if I look back, the first plays I didn't direct. I choreographed them. And I expected the actors to act like I do. That's the last thing you must do. Okay? So I had to teach myself to respect the written word of the playwright, especially if you're working with a classic, where you may not change a line because they've outlived their time. They're still relevant in today's world, the classics. So now you direct it. Say for example, you're working with a classic piece of theatre. You either do it the classic style, or you can deconstruct it, meaning that you make it more accessible to today's audience. If I look back on my career, if I had to do Arthur Miller's The Crucible, which we did way back then, if I have to do it today, I have to realize that I have to speak to a much younger generation, generations of people. You've got to keep them in mind, so that this text becomes, because it's a classic, it becomes relevant to today's world. If you work in soap, there's a recipe that if the soap is a hit, like Igoli was a hit, Sevendelaan was a hit, the formula was correct for the audience. The scripts was correct for the audience. That you discover after it's been on the air for a couple of weeks. It shoots to number one. You're on the right road. You've got the recipe going as a writer and as a director. So you keep to that. You stick to that. Not that it's easy. You can absolutely, because you're playing to a certain audience who's pushing it to number one. Okay? If you make a feature film, which is the director's medium, you take a script that you love. You have to love it. You cannot do it because somebody asked you to do it and you don't like it. Then you put your personal stamp on it. You become a voyeur. The way you see that film in telling the story, and then hoping it'll appeal to a wide audience. I believe if you're very honest and you have warmth as a director, you get warmth into your work, the audience will feel included in what's going on that screen. I don't know whether that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hen. Thank you, guys, for your questions. Hen, I already thanked you before, but it means a hell of a lot to me that I could get you here in a project that means a lot to me and get you at the start to help me launch this thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kaz.